Hello, this is Bob Pellerin, CTOBOB, and today I'd like to show you Windows Server 2022. And in case you think you've missed the launch, you have not. This is a pre-released version, and this is not meant as a die-hard, very detailed-oriented video. This is just to give you sort of a summary of what a server looks like and what services are available, and I'm happy to be using the upcoming version to show you that. So let's take a quick look. And this is a virtual machine running on top of my favorite VMware ESXi version 7. And let's go have a quick look at what this looks like. So first off, you will see that is a typical Windows Server screen. Actually, it looks like a Windows 10 screen as well. So you just go in there, and I've got a significant error here, which I'm going to ignore. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send the keys Control-Alt-Delete so that we can type into here, and we're going to go ahead and log in. And there you go. So this is loading. Okay, so you will notice that I installed the GUI, so the Graphical User Interface, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term. And really what this provides us with is, right off the get-go, is this little dashboard. Alright, so if you're setting up a server, generally what you will want to use it for, especially if you have a single one, is Active Directory, which will allow you to put in users and machines to have a control over your environment. So if you have multiple PCs and so forth, this is what you would use. And of course, you've got things like file sharing, printer sharing. Then you get into services such as DHCP, which we'll see in a minute, and DNS. So you'll see some of the services on here right away. So for those of you unfamiliar with the servers in general, let's just go back here. So everything with the server manager goes through a little tab here, just a little button if you want, tools, and this is where you get to select which services you want. Now generally, if you're new with this, what you'd want is an Active Directory. You would also want the DNS, and I also install Wins. This is more of a legacy aspect of it, but I tend to install that as well. And in my case, I don't have a DHCP here, but if let's say I wanted to have a DHCP and I, basically stare at this and go, "Ooh, I'm missing something," well, you can simply click on Add Roles and Features, and at that point, I'm going through this little wizard. So I would say, "What do you want?" Keep going, and role-based feature. I want to keep going. Server selection, I only have one, so I'm going to go ahead and select this one. And if I wanted to install DHCP, all it takes is for me to put a little check mark, which I just did. And so then it pops this up and it says, "Oh, you want to install DHCP?" And you would click on Add Feature, and that would be it. It would then install. So as I said, part of the things on a server, the one that you want to install is the domain services right here. And we'll take a quick look at that. There's a DNS server here. So for those of you who have listened to my videos regarding, for example, VCSA, so it's the VMware, it's basically vCenter that controls a lot of ESX servers and hosts. This is one of the components that you require, or really, really highly recommended that you have in your environment, a DNS. So it's real simple to set up. I'll take a quick look at it. It has been set up already, it's installed. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what that does. There's file here, file and storage services. And I also added, let's see what else I've got on here. I've got a web service IIS. Again, if you're not planning on hosting anything locally, you don't need this. And again, you can just unselect it and press next. I'm not going to go ahead and play with this too much. The other thing is, if you go into the features, this is where you can obviously go and add, remove things. If you wanted to use terminal services, for example, or the RDP as it is officially known, remote desktop, you can set it up through this interface. So let's go ahead and just cancel this. And so if I wanted to go into the DNS, which is really a basic feature of a server, I click on Tools, I go to DNS, and this is what it would look like. Now we're using Cobaltium.ca, which is just as an example here. And so what I would have is my forward lookup zone and my reverse lookup zone. The reverse lookup zone is actually takes the IP addresses and translates them back to the names. In the other, the forward looking up zones, what you do is you define a domain. So in this case, it would be Cobaltium.ca. And you would have, as you can tell, there's a whole bunch of information in here. But really what you do is you will define your hosts. So in this case, I have this server, which I call DC 2022. And this is its IP address. It is a static IP address. And so all it does is if any one or any service goes and asks for DC-2022, this DNS will respond and understand and basically translate this to an IP address and send that back. So this actually, you're doing this if you have a workstation, a laptop, anything that's connected to the internet. If you're going to go and search for www.google.com, for example, that actually gets translated by DNS somewhere and sends you back an IP address. You might not see or be aware of this transaction, but this is what's happening. So that's one of the services. And the reverse is really just the opposite. So if it wants to know what 230, 1 is, for example, it would go in here. I don't even seem to have a zone. And again, if I wanted to create a zone, you basically just have to click here and say new zone, do next, do a primary zone. And then it would basically say, okay, to all the DNS servers, I'm just going to say next. And it's an IP4 zone. And then it's going to ask me for what I'm using internally. So it's 192.168.1, which is very common. That's the default. This is an entirely test environment, so there's nothing there. And so it's going to use this. I'm going to say next. I'm going to allow only secure dynamic updates and do finished. And ta-da, I've got myself a zone. And what this does, let me take a quick look at it, is it basically shows it to me in reverse. So I'm seeing, instead of 192.168.1. something, I'm seeing 1.168.192 and so forth. So this is literally a reverse. And at that point, what you're seeing is the name server and the start of authority, which is for the services. And it shows it to you that this address points back to this. I can actually go take a look at it. And you can see lots of different information in here. Which is not terribly useful to us right now because it is very automatic. So please don't think you need to go and play with this or add things. Generally, when you create your domain controller, it will go and add the DNS with it. And so, in fact, I believe that this is how this one was created. I set this up as a domain controller. So just to give you a bit more insight into what this looks like, in case you're not familiar, let's go into the DC, the domain controller's Active Directory component. So the things that will be of interest to you is there's what they call a forest, which is the overall corporation, for example, and then you've got domains. Most companies, unless you're very large, will have a single domain within a single forest, because you can have multiple domains under a forest, but I'm not going to get into that right now. And so if you have one office with, whether it's 200, 150, or 3 users, you would end up with a domain at that point. So if I go into domains and trusts, for example, just to show you, so I have created one domain here called Cobaltium.ca, and that's all there is in there. And then if I wanted to go sites and services, I can go in here, and this is just to show you around a little bit. And this is actually not popping up. Oh, there we go. Okay. And so in this case, there is a single site. Again, this is basically just a test environment, so there's not a whole lot in here. And it shows you what the default site is. It's going to go back to servers, and under servers, lo and behold, surprise, surprise, I've got my single DC-2022 server. So that's all there is. So, all right, so let's close this. I mean, there's a bit of information you can go and look. You can go here and go to properties. You can take a look at it. It shows you that, it's a global catalog. Again, there's not a whole lot that you can do. I'm just trying to show you a bit of the details that this could provide. Really, where you're going to be working on in a domain controller is when you go into users and computers. So what that will do is it will allow you to create new users. So you've got some that are built in, and let's see. Okay, so these are all the ones that are built in. And so you've got, for example, groups. These are all, when you have two little individuals here, this is to show you groups. So you've got backup operators, administrators, so forth. And you've got groups for things like replication, terminal service, license servers. And so there's lots of things in here. Under computers, that's where you would find your computers as they register onto your domain. And under users, when you're starting off, you probably have nothing in here except administrator, which is the default, main master account, and that's what this logs into right now. And you have one called guest. Now, in this case, the guest is turned off for security reasons. And if you want to create a new user, then you would just simply go up on here, which, I don't know if you can see the icon there, a little gentleman, and you click on here and it would create a new name, and it would ask you, okay, what's the name of the person? And then after that you would create them so that they could then log into a computer that is on the domain using these credentials. And of course, when you create them, actually let's go ahead and create one. So we're gonna go ahead and create one here just to show you. I'm just gonna create Bob at Cabalsim, there we go, .ca. I'm gonna need to put in a password. The password has to be somewhat complex. This is by default. So I'm going to put in the word test. What I'm expecting to see is, I'm actually going to change this. And I'm actually going to, okay, for right now, I'm just going to do this. So I just put in the word test, and I should be getting an error message. Well, okay, I am wrong. Okay, I will go back, and maybe I've played with this a little bit, so I don't remember changing the default settings, but in theory you need something that's complex. You need something that is, for example, more than 8 or 10 or 12 characters long. You want to have some numbers, some special characters, so no one can just put the word password there, because the last thing you want is to create a test environment that has the word test or password or something like that everywhere, and then I see this a lot. The test environment stays on for longer than anticipated, or God forbid it suddenly becomes a production machine, then that could be deadly, because you could have users and passwords out there that suddenly have password as a password, and if someone could crack into this, as you see over and over again in the news. It is a thing. People get in. There's bugs, errors, software that's been compromised. You got virus, a worm, malware, and so forth. They get into the system, and if you've got some weak passwords out there, it will certainly help them get in faster and do things more easily. So even if you lock down a user, sometimes there's errors in the coding, the original, for example, part of the services, perhaps. And so what will happen then is you'll end up getting compromised, all because one of your users had it as a password. And the other thing is, where it says password never expires, you really need to make sure that the expiration is in place. So I wouldn't put this, for example. And in fact, usually what I do is I say user must change password at next login. So next time they go in, they will have to change it. So I'm going to go ahead and type in something a little more complicated. Actually, there we go. And so there we go. So now I've created it, and now I've got a Bob Pellerin as a user. So that's all it took. If you go into the properties, you'll notice there's a whole slew of extra features on top here, or extra tabs, I should say, information that you could put in, and you can put descriptions, where the office is. Again, if you've got a larger office where you've got multiple floors and so forth, then you might want to say, second floor, East End, or East End, something, whatever it is. You'd put that in. You could put in your address. You could put in, so the account right now is Bob so Bob, the user, must change the password next login. I can make it expire. So if I hire someone and it's I don't know, somebody for a specific job for 3 months, I could say, hey, you know what, this user is going to expire in a few months. There we go, and just do this and say apply. And now this is going to expire. The other thing is if you have login scripts, these are scripts that you can create, such as a batch file or a CMD file. I'm not going to go into the details of that. There's various ways of doing this. This is where you would put it in. So if I had one called general.bat or general.cmd and so forth, in there, typically what you would have is you would have a net use statement. And this is just one example. You may not have any, but a net use statement would say, okay, so I'm going to give all my users a drive P that points to a share called public. And so what that would do is it would run this little batch file or command file and would assign the share to that drive letter, so that if I log in as Bob, then I would be getting that automatically. The other way that you could do it, and I don't actually have a share on here, so this is not going to work as well as expected, but you could also, for example, select the home folders. So you could say, okay, whenever the person starts, I want them to have connection directly to, I'm going to call it server. I know that's not the name of my machine right now, but server.users. And then you could have, here's a little trick for you. You could have username like this. If you do this, then what it does is when you say apply, it would replace the username with the username that is for this user, which is Bob. Or of course, if you want to do it manually, you could simply type in Bob as well, and then it will go and create that under the shared users on the server. Now this would actually not work because my server's not called server, but just wanted to show you briefly how that would work. So I'm going to do, actually I'm just going to re-click on here. The rest of the information there, for example, you have, remember, this is where you would go and add Bob, the new users, to groups. And of course, if you have accounting or you have administration, for example, you could go and put them into groups. Usually I have one called management, for example, so the president and the VPs can share a specific folder, and by putting them into the group, then I could have, as part of their login script, it would automatically put them, connect them. So no matter which machine they go to, if they log in as themselves, then it would automatically detect that they're in that group, run that script for them, and give them that drive. Now, the other things that are on here is, let's see, environment. If you wanted Bob to only have access to a specific program for whatever reasons, perhaps Bob is on a sales showroom floor, and when he opens it, you only want Bob to be able to go into Microsoft Edge, for example. Well, you could set that up. There is also something, in case you are in that scenario where you have something in a showroom, there's something called a kiosk mode. I just mentioned it since it's on my mind. And a kiosk mode will lock you in, or lock in that specific user into that mode. And what that is typically is it's a computer that you don't want everybody running just anything. So you would lock it to, like I said, Microsoft Edge, for example, and that's all that user could go into. And if they try to get out of it, it basically logs out. And if you go back in, it just goes back to that. So at that point, it's a self-contained type of environment. So the users are less likely to create damage or load the stuff and cause you undue harm. Okay, so that's kind of a look around here. And creating groups. If you right click, you have new here. You can also go on the top there. So there's various ways of doing this. And of course, if you feel very confident or you feel more adventurous, you could also use the command prompts. There is a PowerShell that you can use, and you could type in the commands to create users and groups and so forth. So if you want to play with that, that's certainly the way to go. In the ideal world, you would not want to have a GUI at all, so the graphical user interface. you would not want it because it does take extra resources to run and so forth. So the server, you'd want to keep it as small as possible. That's one way to do it. The other thing is when you're installing a server, ideally install as few services as you can, meaning that if you're not going to be using a DNS server, it's pointless to install it as a feature on here, because the more things that are running, not only is it using up resources, but you're increasing the amount of things that could get attacked. If, for example, in the future, DHCP server is vulnerable to some sort of attack, if you have it on here, even if it's off, it potentially, I mean, not the service, but even if it's not actually giving out DHCP service addresses, then it could become a problem. I think I used probably not the best of examples for the DHCP, but yeah, you get my point. I mean, you could have a DNS server on here running, for example, and if nobody points to it, really it's not serving anyone. So in this case, it would be running and vulnerable to attacks potentially. So, okay, so if I want to create a group, again, all I did is right-click, click on New, I clicked on Group, and then you have to determine what kind of group it is. So you could have, let's say, just a global group. It's going to be a security group, and I'm going to call it Managers, and you're going to do Next. Now, what's interesting is you can do it both ways. You can either click on the managers, and you can say Members, and then go and add who you want. So if I want to add Bob, click on check name, there's Bob, click OK. Now Bob is part of managers. You could also, let me just delete Bob here. So if you could also go into Bob and go into members of, click add, and now do managers. Check name to make sure it's there. It underlines, click OK, and now Bob is part of managers. So as you can tell, you can do it from one side or the other. And of course, right now, managers really doesn't do anything since I haven't assigned it anything special. And the way that would work is if I were to go into the computer, so I would usually have more than one drive. So usually I would create a second drive, and the second drive, so not the C, and that would have, for example, data, and in there I would share something. And so what I could do, usually what I do is I'll say, okay, so I'm going to put all the groups together here under data, and then I would create one for managers. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. And if I wanted to share this, then I would simply go here and go to properties, you go under sharing. Usually I go into advanced, but for the sake of trying to keep this simple, you just click on share. And then it's going to ask me, okay, well, who's going to have a right to go into choose people on your network. And so what I want to do is I want to find people, and I want to say, okay, this is going to be for managers. So I'm going to type in partially here and click on check. It finds managers because I typed in enough letters. Go, right? And then I want the managers to be able to read and write. And I'm going to say share. And now I've got the name of my server and managers. And if I'm a manager, which Bob is, because I've added Bob to managers, then Bob would have access to managers. And if I wanted this to pop up automatically for Bob, and then I could go into the profile, I could say connect to, and I could say, all right, I want M to be, and then it would be, in my case, I believe I called it DC 2022/managers, and that's what I would do and say apply. Okay, I click OK, and at that point, if I log in as Bob, I would get an M drive, and it would point to managers. And what I mean by M drive is if you go here into your computer, here I've got a C drive and a D drive. Well, if I had logged in as Bob, I would see an M here. So it would say managers, and in little brackets there, I would say M. So I think this is it. Just wanted to show you around, and hopefully this helps out someone out there just to get an overview of what a server is, what the type of services that can be on there. For the 2022, those of you who are familiar with the 2019 or the 2016 are going to feel right at home. This is really, it's very familiar. Even if you click on, for example, the start, I mean, you'll see that yes, it looks a little different, and thankfully it's much, much better than the old 2012 and 2012 R2, which were notoriously bizarre. You had to click on the right to really get into, let's say, control panel or things like that. But so this one has a more Windows 10 type of look and feel to it, and so you'll feel right at home with the server. Speed-wise, it's very comparable to the 2019. Some people have told me that it's a little bit slower than 2016, and I've had some comments along those lines. Again, it depends what you're doing. I mean, the challenge I have for speed, to be very frank, is if you go back to the older versions, traditionally you'd be running on the mechanical drives if it's, back enough, for example, 2012 R2. Now, if you're going from a mechanical drive to an SSD drive, you're going to get some difference in speed. The other thing, too, is the servers, as they come out, have more cache. On the RAID controller, they have more memory, faster CPUs. So it's very hard to, in a working environment anyways, to really compare. What I need to do is have two servers side by side, the exact same configuration, running both. I have not done so, I'll be very honest with you. So that's maybe something that we could play with. But again, from a benchmarking, it's very similar. I'm not expecting to see, dramatic difference, especially since it's the operating system. It really relies on the hardware. If you're using NVMe drives in your environment, if you're with new Dell products or HP products or whatever brand you like, you'll get a lot more cache on the RAID controller, you get much faster drives, depending on the type of RAID as well that you're using. RAID 1 is really actually, I was going to say RAID 10. I just said RAID 1. RAID 1 is just mirroring. RAID 10 is basically like a RAID 0 mirrored, so it provides that. That is very fast. RAID 5, if you're thinking about RAID 5 in a production environment, take a look at RAID 6, which basically just adds one more drive. Again, there is a cost to this, and the RAID is, and for those of you who don't know this, you definitely need to look into this. This is RAID, and it's a way of having redundant drives so that if there's a failure, that you will be able to recover and keep working through the failure while you're waiting for the replacement part. Now, keep in mind, if you're building a server, a physical machine, or you're ordering one that's already fully configured and so forth, the main breakage, usually the main weak points, I guess, on a server are the power supplies, which is the module that brings the power directly to the rest of the system. That's where you plug in your wire, and the drives. And the drives are very likely to fail compared to the rest. So that's why they have a redundant power supply in most servers, especially when you get into the higher end ones. And I highly, highly recommend always having two power supplies. And for the drives, at a minimum, put in a RAID 5. It does slow down somewhat as opposed to a RAID 10. However, it does give you some redundancy. Where you want to get a higher end RAID controller is when something breaks. If you have the bare minimum, for example, if you've got an H300 series in a Dell and you had the choice to go into the H700 series, the difference is when it breaks, the rebuild time is going to be atrocious. Well, actually, it gets better with SSDs, but it's not going to be great with the very basic controller they give you. So in time of recovery, that's where all that extra money you put in is going to come in super handy, and it's going to make a dramatic difference in how well the system performs when it has one of the drives that has failed. So I hope this has been helpful. This is CTOBOB. Please, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And of course, if you want to encourage us, please go ahead and subscribe. That really is appreciated. So you can reach us as well at www.ctobob.com. Leave a comment below, and we'll make sure to read your comments and answer when we can. Thank you.